Hi, I'm here today with Tara Rivera, who is the treatment advocate for the Recovery Centers of America.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us. Not an easy topic to talk about right now, but we're talking about alcohol and drug addictions and what the recovery centers do. How did you first get involved with the recovery centers and in this field?
Yep, so it is a tough field and it's a tough conversation to have. I have been at Recovery Centers of America for about 2.5 years now. So I started November 2016, right after our facility in Westminster opened. And it was just a passion of mine. I had been volunteering for a faith-based sober house in Fitchburg and kind of got the bug, if you will. I really wanted to start contributing and breaking the stigma, educating myself and educating others. Recovery Centers of America opened up. It was about 3 miles from my house.
Oh, handy.
And I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot and apply and see what happens. And I've been there ever since.
Oh, that's great. The prevalence of alcohol and drug abuse, and I know preparing for the show we talked a little bit about how alcohol abuse is still a greater problem, much as we don't talk about it anymore, as nearly as much as drug abuse is.
Yeah.
It's more of a problem, and it seems more prevalent than 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
When I was growing up. It just seems more of a problem. How did we get here, I guess is one question. How do we get here?
That's a good question. So alcohol is still a very prevalent issue, I think, because we've lost so many people and the numbers continue to rise with the opioid epidemic, that the most of the focus has been on that, which is, that is true. 2016, we lost 64,000 people. In 2017, it was a little over 72,000 people to the opioid epidemic. However, for alcohol-related deaths, it's about 80,000 per year, and that's been pretty steady over the last several years. So there hasn't been an uptick in that. So I tend to think that because there hasn't been an uptick, that there hasn't been an uproar.
Sure.
And so because there has been, so many deaths to opioid-related, use, that people now are focused on the opioid epidemic. But both are still very prevalent. In our facilities, I would say 50-50. So 50% of the folks are there for purely alcohol, and maybe 50%, opioid-related addiction. So it's still very prevalent. It is still a big problem in our community.
Yeah. And identifying how we got there could take up hours. I'm sure people are engaged in that, and I know we talked about everything from social media to just the pharmaceutical companies and how they push that different kinds of drugs on people who are dealing with pain, and maybe it started out with good intentions but has gone in a different direction. Yeah. And part of it, I think, too, is that the alcohol drug piece is. Do you think it's because people have accepted alcohol for generations,
yeah,
and the others are newer?
I think that, so two things. When we talk about the epidemic and kind of where we're at right now, I think that I almost always recommend reading a book called Dreamland by Sam Kionis, and he looks at a very multi-pronged approach to how did we get here, and he talks about the heroin that was coming in from Mexico and how they kind of distributed that and followed methadone clinics across the country to kind of create new hot spots. They also talk about Purdue Pharma and the different, pharmaceutical companies and how they kind of created, and played a part in kind of where we're at. So it's a phenomenal book. Somebody can have a problem with alcohol and be a very high-functioning alcoholic. I think a lot of us, if we sat and really thought about it, we could think of a handful of people that, probably have a problem with alcohol, but they're still going to work, they're still paying their mortgage, they're doing the things that they need to do, maybe, kind of drink a little too much on the weekends or in the evenings, but they're high-functioning, and then it also isn't something that they can overdose and die from immediately. Right. Typically what happens with someone that struggles with an alcohol addiction is then they'll start to have some type of other symptoms, whether it's liver problems or those types of things, and then the alcohol addiction is kind of revealed. Whereas when you struggle with an opioid epidemic or you're using opioids, you hit the bottom a lot faster.
Okay.
And so I think that's why it's so prevalent and so hard to avoid,
Sure.
Yeah,
and
or to hide.
Yeah, that makes sense. So at Recovery Treatment Centers of America.
Recovery Centers of America.
How do you approach treating people and helping people specifically? What makes your center a little different than perhaps other?
So I love Recovery Centers America. I love to tell people that, before we even opened our doors, our owner did over a year worth of research with really high level folks in the industry to learn about other treatment centers and what worked and what didn't. Everything that we do is based on evidence-based practice. We have really high level, master level clinicians at our facilities. So we offer very individualized treatment plans there. So what brought me in is not necessarily going to be what brought you in. I may have had some trauma in my childhood, or you may be someone that was a first responder. So we all have very different needs and very different reasons as to why we chose to pick up drugs or alcohol in the first place. So I like to say that we really treat everybody as an individual. Everybody has an individualized treatment plan, and it looks very different than the next.
Okay. Outpatient services as well as inpatient, or you're totally residential? What?
Yep, so we do at the Westminster facility, which is closest to where we are, we do detox and residential level of care. We have 90 beds there, so that is usually about a 21 to 28 day stay, and we are now in the process of developing our outpatient program. However, in our Danvers facility, our outpatient is already up and running, so we do offer outpatient in our Danvers site.
Okay. And families? Because that's one, as we've talked about in the past too, both alcohol and drug abuse can just destroy families.
Yes.
Certainly Now, your outpatient programs, do you deal with families at all?
So actually, we deal with families when our patients are actually in our facilities. So we have a really great family program. We have a family therapist that invites our family members in to participate in the care for our patients. So, it is a family disease. Even though one person is struggling with addiction, it affects the whole family. It affects the husband or the wife. It affects the children, the spouse, the parents.
Sure.
So it's a family disease, and it's really important for our folks that come in for treatment for their family to understand what they're going through, understand a little bit about the disease of addiction, and how to best support their loved one when they go home. So we kind of teach them that, how to love and support them, but not enable them, which is really important.
It is important. Yes, there's a fine line often.
Very fine line
between enabling and helping. Yeah, that's really. Well, we could talk for hours. I appreciate your coming in today and sharing a little bit. How do people get in touch with you if they want more information?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, as a treatment advocate, am very strong and passionate about helping people and being accessible. So I like people to call my cell phone. My cell phone number is 978-870-7734.
Okay, we can run that along the scroll.
And you could always look us up at recoverycentersamerica.com.
Okay.
And we have a 1-800 number, which is 1-800-RECOVERY as well. But
okay, we'll run that as throughout the course of the interview. That'll be run.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming, and we'll talk with you later, and we'll be back. Hi, I'm here today with Dennis Bates, Executive Director, and Kate Toomey, whose title is
Business Development Representative.
There we go, from Sunrise Detox in Millbury. Thank you for joining us and talking about a hard, difficult subject to talk about, alcohol and drug addiction. Your facility is a detox specifically, and you see people obviously with both issues. And my first question is, how did we get here? How did it become so prevalent, both alcohol and particularly drug addiction, and that we need a facility like yours?
Boy, people have been.
Now we only have,
people. Yeah, I was going to say we have 8 minutes.
Yeah.
People have been asking that question for a long time, Matt. We've been the most dangerous drug besides tobacco that we know is still alcohol, but it's more accepted. You can't watch any TV show without alcohol commercials. So we're still, I would say, 40 to 50% of the people that come through our detox is still alcohol. But we've seen a significant increase in the opioids, and where it began. Heroin's been around for a long time. Opioids have been around for a long time. We had the thing with the issues with the prescriptions. And with the doctors and the kickbacks, and I don't know all the specifics of that, but we've all read about it. So that certainly created it in the late 90s. And I think what really brought the opiates on, what I saw, and I've been doing this for a couple of weeks, is back in the 70s, when someone would buy heroin on the street, the actual heroin content in it was about 30 to 33%. And then it kind of went off the off the map for a while. In the 80s were all cocaine, if you remember.
Right.
And then in the 90s, crack cocaine came out. And then in the late 90s, heroin came back. And what happened was, actually, if the marketers, what kept people away from heroin was the stigma of the needle. Correct? So all of a sudden, heroin started showing up on the streets. Instead of 33%, it was 90% pure. So they could market it differently. You don't have to stick a needle in your arm. You can just, knowing all too well they're going to end up injecting it at some point anyway. And one of the trends we saw, and I know you did, is in the late 90s, all the people that were addicted to heroin in the 70s were dropping dead because they were shooting up the same amount that they did in the 70s, but it was 3 times the strength.
Oh, sure.
So
And now it's the cheap drug, right? It's one of the cheaper drugs?
well, actually, fentanyl is the cheap drug now. We're seeing more fentanyl than we are heroin.
Wow. Well, that's even deadlier. Not
It's
that-
100
not that-
times stronger,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and they're putting fentanyl in everything. They're putting it in pot, they're putting it in cocaine, they're putting it in everything. So it's
What a
scary
crazy-
because,
it is crazy, scary world.
yeah.
So how, somebody comes to you, or a family member says need some help, or how do people get to you, and what do you do at Sunshine Detox?
It's Sunrise.
Sunrise.
That's okay. It's Sunrise. We have a call center. We're based out of Lake Worth, Florida. We have 3 detoxes in Florida. We have 3 in New Jersey. We have one in Alpharetta, Georgia now, and now the one in Millbury. And we're opening one in Long Island fairly soon. So we have a call center where the prospective patient is screened. At that point, once we've gotten their history, make sure they're appropriate for that level of care, then the admission is scheduled for us to come in. Then when they come to us, of course, they get the full physical. We're like remember the show MASH?
Sure.
We're a MASH unit for addiction. We're like we're like an addiction ER. So they'll come in, we'll get them medically stabilized, but our focus is on the next level of care. In the old days, when I first started in this field in the 90s, someone would go into detox and they were given an AA list and said, go to a meeting. Well, AA I love. It's helped millions of people over the last 85 years, but it's not treatment, it's community support. So we really focus on the next level of care that would be most appropriate for the patient and that the patient can actually do, whether it's an intensive outpatient, a residential program, because we know that they're most vulnerable to have a recurrence of symptoms in the first 5 months.
Sure.
And then at that 5-month mark, it drops. They're still vulnerable, but not as vulnerable. So our job is medical stabilization. It's with dignity, it's solution focused, it's a non-shaming, beautiful facility. Excuse me, it's not hospital based. It's a freestanding facility. So it's not your typical detox that when people think of a detox, they think of the, the gown and the smiley slippers, and
Sure.
we don't.
Sure.
And,
Kind of a
and
dark
folks can also call me directly as well. Yeah.
How do we get people to take that step?
Well, part of what I do is go out and go to community meetings and meet with doctors, I meet with therapists, I meet with DAs, I meet with police and fire departments because they're first
administering
responders right
Narcan
on the scene, right?
Local hospitals.
Yeah, local hospitals and introduce myself and create that communication so that there's a trust level and they understand that, they call me, I'm going to call them back, I'm going to be able to find a placement for folks if we don't have a bed, but we have 39 beds in our facility, so the likelihood of not having one is not there right now, so we hope it'll be.
Well, we're filling up pretty quick. I think also, I think the biggest barrier we face with people is the stigma that's attached to it.
Right.
I don't want to be called a junkie.
Right.
We don't use that language.
I don't have a problem. I mean, how do you get the person to accept the problem in the first place?
So here's the other thing. So many families will call, right? And they think, all right, well, this is what they need, and they need X amount of days, and et cetera. So let me ask you this question: have you talked to the family member about them coming? Do they want to come? No, but they're coming because we're not putting up with it anymore. I said, can I just tell you that if they don't want to be here, it's much harder.
Yeah,
for
the
them.
idea of an intervention, that's
Right.
always
And it's-
sounds like a great idea, but
Yeah,
I don't
no.
see that working. Right?
No, we do have interventionists that we refer to people, but it's not like what you see on TV, and that really shouldn't be done that way.
Yeah, but there's some very qualified
Right.
interventionists out there.
And we work with them,
We
too.
work closely with them. Sometimes, everyone says I have to be ready, but their brain is so impaired they really don't know if they're ready. You're talking about someone that's basically handicapped, expecting him to carry someone else, and you really can't do that. If their brain is impaired, sometimes that intervention is needed.
And that's
Right.
what what we talked about
Right.
in getting ready for this program is that it really is something that has gone on in the brain that is a disease or something that has caused the person to become an addict in the first place. And that's hard for some of us to kind of accept, especially those of us who are a little older than the two of you are. It's like a little hard to really understand that, but it's something that has gone on in the brain in the first place that is causing the person to become an addict of one sort or another.
Absolutely. I mean, it's in the pleasure centers of the brain, in the amygdala, the hippocampus areas. So most of the people I have the honor to work with in the detox, the patients I get to work with, every event in their life, they value their families, they value their career, they value the relationships in their lives. But almost every event that happens in their life, even though they value this and I believe them, they go to using. Almost every emotion that comes up in their life, when they're happy, when they're sad, when they're grieving, even though they value their family, they're going to go to use because
It makes
that's
them
their
feel
coping
better.
mechanism.
I think that's an important, maybe the most important thing we've talked about, because it is hard for some of us who are particularly a little older to accept that that's what is causing this.
Right. Trauma is also a big indicator of people using it as self-medication. Things that happened in their lives, and a loss or someone hurting them.
Sure.
And that's a big issue. It's a huge issue, and it's a great predictor of potential abuse later on in life. So,
Right.
So somebody wants to get in touch with you,
508-735-8058.
and that'll be on the scroll underneath the interview anyway, so we'll do that. I appreciate your coming very much, and we could talk about this for an hour.
We just started.
We just
I know,
started,
we just started.
and we'll have you back and talk some more.
Matt, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, and we'll be right back. Hi, I'm here today with Worcester County Sheriff Lou Evangelidis. Welcome, and thank you for coming and sharing some of what's going on at the Sheriff's Office and beyond with us today. What I wanted to talk about, the opioid crisis and alcohol and drug abuse is such a prevalent problem. I don't know how we got here, where it's this big a problem,
Right.
but it has to affect you in a major way, from what I understand. Exactly how does it affect you? And I know you have
Yeah.
some programs to help address
Sure.
people and maybe keep people from visiting your jail.
Yeah, well, I would say this: when I ran for sheriff 8 years ago, I certainly had some suspicions that certain drug issues were becoming more prevalent, in the sense that historically drugs come and go. And I grew up at a time in the '60s. Frankly, I was born and raised in Worcester, and I never thought we'd see heroin again. I remember, if you remember, the heroin epidemic
Sure.
of the '60s and '70s. And then next thing you know, things come back. Crack cocaine came on the scene and things. So when I was elected sheriff 8 years ago, it was pretty clear to me that we were entering to a really dangerous phase of opioid addiction in this country. So the answer to your question is how it impacts us is dramatically. Approximately 90% of the people who enter the Worcester County House of Correction in jail come in with a substance disorder, addiction, and that's the first question we ask when you enter our facility is, are you high, or are you under the influence, or are you addicted to any particular substances? Because if you are, we have to immediately get you into our hospital unit to detoxify. It's a terrible thing.
Sure.
So then we deal with, obviously, the main impact of it is this, and we can talk about the societal impacts forever, but as the sheriff of this county, what I try to do is, number one, help those people who are in our care, custody, and control. There's about 1,000 people today. As I said, 800 and plus of them, close to 900, have been substance abusers in their lifetime, whether it be alcohol or prescription pills or you name it. So what we try to do is offer the programming that we have. We have a limited budget to do it, but we have substance abuse counselors, we have teachers, we have people to help these people who want to help themselves. And we don't coddle people at the jail, but we say to them, if you want to help yourself, we have hired and trained the people to help you. And those people who sign up for those classes, they're real, they're held accountable. We have I think the model in Massachusetts, written up by the Boston Globe, called our STOP program, which is a standalone facility. We used to have 36 beds for women in our facility, but we do not have women anymore. Our women from Worcester County go to the Chicopee. So we utilize that building as a 36 standalone facility for the inmates who have demonstrated the best behaviors, the most sincere interest in turning their lives around, needing the help of treatment, and also usually with a 6-month or longer sentence remaining, because it's a live-in 6-month program. Our rates of recidivism, meaning people that go out and recommit crimes, far lower from people that graduate from those programs. Okay. And then just to quickly just touch the other areas, and then, so we also run 3 centers outside of the jail, which many people aren't aware of.
I was not aware.
Yeah, we have a center in Worcester, we have one in Fitchburg, and we have one in Webster. And these are diversion centers. Think of a day reporting center. Someone gets arrested, maybe it's their first time, they have a drug dependency, breaking and entering, something like that, where the judge says, you could be incarcerated, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to go to the sheriff's office in, say, Webster. And on a daily basis, you're going to report in. We'll randomly drug treat you, but we'll also offer you a counselor with supervision, and you'll have the opportunity to educate yourself and get treatment and things like that. We have a transportation that we offer people. So we try to give people, keep them on the straight and narrow, and if they violate, they can go to prison. But we give people this opportunity. It's $4,000 a year to put someone in that program versus $50,000 to incarcerate. Wow. Now, we're not talking about people that are dangerous to society, but people that should be given this opportunity. We do, and they give them a chance to turn their lives around. So as a matter of fact, I'm leaving here today. We're going to Fitchburg. We have another graduation ceremony, 15 people who have entered that program, successfully completed about a 12-week program, rigorous. I wouldn't go up there and be part of this if they didn't earn their way through this program. We know these people are going to be far less likely to recommit crimes because of these programs. And then the final piece I'll mention on this is, you know, one of the things I set my mind to when I got to be sheriff, and by the way, I'm blessed to have this job. It's a tremendous job. I really, I grew up in this community, and Worcester and Holden and Worcester County has been my home, and Shrewsbury obviously is a big part of the county, and a lot of my friends and family have lived here through the years. And I wanted to try to come up with a program that we could to get ahead of this problem. In other words, we're chasing it in the criminal justice system. Sure. And as a judge once said to me, and he's so right, he said, if we could eliminate drugs and alcohol from our society, we would probably be able to turn our courthouses and prisons into like bowling alleys and movie theaters. But unfortunately, that's not happening. That's how big of an impact. So when we created this program in the office, I'm the only sheriff in America doing it, very proud of it, but it's called Face to Face. And it's a way I go into middle schools and high schools, and I bring kind of an educational but interactive and fun program in a way. It's got videos of Eminem, Charlie Sheen, Lindsay Lohan. I talk to the students, but the idea is your choices matter. And it's really about 2 things. It's about facts and it's about myths. And every inmate in jail and all the kids I usually talk to, these students, they all know the myths about drugs. And I'll give you an example of a myth. A myth, I can quit anytime I want, I'll never get addicted. The great myth of drugs. Sure. And even with marijuana being, safe because it's natural and from the earth. Well, heroin and cocaine are natural and from the earth too. So I try to dispel the myths in an entertaining way. It's about an hour program. We just presented two presentations this week in Mendon, and we go all over the county. I've put this program in front of 370,000 students. So if you have a child or a grandchild watching, and you're watching this program, chances are I've been before them. And I just hope, I'm sure there are a lot of students that are never going to go down that road. I get that, and they don't need the program. And there's probably a quarter of the people maybe have already made those decisions. But there's a large group of students, young people in our community who are trying to figure out this issue of drugs, and especially with opioids, because the myth is that it's medicine and it's not dangerous, and we need to educate students. There's some literature that talks about education starting in 4th and 5th grade, just about prescription pills and these containers.
Isn't it scary? Because
it's terrifying.
You say that there's all these kids who maybe don't need this. they all need it because they all know somebody
That's
else
right.
in their age group.
Yeah.
And 4th or 5th graders, and they are. It's scary.
Can I tell you one thing? This is one of the most surprising things about this presentation. And I put it on, I said, in front of 370,000 students over my 8 years as sheriff, and I'm honored to do it. It really is. I have, when I started, I had 2 teenagers. Now, as you know, life goes, they move on. But I get it, and I know the struggles. But what really surprised me after the presentations was how many students would come up to me and they would talk to me, and I thought it was going to be about themselves or their friends, and so many came to me and talk about their parents and their uncles and their aunts, and that was really devastating to hear about these unsettled environments that these students are leaving to go to school. Wow, that's a tough problem.
It is. When I look at who's using drugs, I always thought, well, it's that 18 to 25,
Right.
18 to 30 maybe, because that's the old stereotype.
Yep.
Back when heroin was initially,
right.
it wasn't kids,
That's
and it
right.
wasn't people, they sort of grew out of it by the time
Yeah.
they were 30-something.
Yeah.
And now it cuts across every age.
Right.
It's really frightening.
Well, can I mention one thing just
Sure.
on that point? Because I go to a lot of groups, and I've talked to a lot of family groups, and I remember going to a Learning to Cope group, wonderful group of supportive parents who are parents of people who have gotten into addiction, many, if not almost all of them, heroin. And one of the things I learned at that when I was talking to the family, it was so true. They said that, because I was wondering, how do you get to this epidemic of heroin? I mean, you remember heroin in the day. How would you ever do this again? It was the worst of all drugs, and it still is. But what's happened is, in the old days, it was like you had drinks, alcohol, marijuana, and then it was basically heroin, And that was a monumental leap. But today, you can go from marijuana to OxyContin, to, and then move up the chain of those prescription painkillers. And next thing you know, you're addicted to them and they're too expensive for you to buy on the street. And heroin is so cheap now, it's not that big of a leap anymore. So the ladder used to have only one big rung in it, and it was a big one. Now there's a whole lot of shorter rungs to get to heroin, and it's killing our people. And that's the sadness of it all. We're dying.
Well, thank you for everything that you're doing. It's you've taken a role that in a leadership way, and really appreciate that. And when you see all these people who are affected by alcohol and drugs, anything that people like you can do to try to thwart that is really appreciated. And thank you for coming. We'll have you back, and we'll talk some more about those kinds of programs.
Sure, I'd love to. Thank
Great.
you very much.
And we'll be back. Hoping that we treat everybody today with respect, tolerance, and kindness. Thanks for joining us. Till next time.